Joining us now to talk about this and other subjects, political commentator Rick Ungar. Rick, we welcome you back to America's Forum.
How are you guys?
We're happy to have you here, and perhaps you can fill us in on this from your perspective. What do you make of Kerry testifying on an alternate date? Or do you believe that Secretary Kerry will get out of testifying, perhaps either by the president saying this is a matter of executive privilege, or just by congressional accommodation in this regard?
I think you have to break it down a little bit, JD. I mean, first of all, Kerry was not the Secretary of State when this all took place. In fact, he was sitting on the congressional side of things. So that's number one. You have to wonder why he would have some special knowledge of what the thought process were. The only thing he could be expected to know is any documentation that he may have come across or sought out once he reached his job as Secretary of State. If that's the case, you really could, in fact, in this instance, make a claim for executive privilege because you're asking him to testify to documents and things he would have gotten secondhand. That's a little bit dicey. Frankly, I know you're not going to agree with me, but I think this is showboating. There are many witnesses that make sense to call if you're going to have these hearings. I don't get where Secretary Kerry is one of them.
And of course, this particular invitation or subpoena came from House Oversight and Government Reform, chaired by Darrell Issa. Of course, there's the other committee, the Select Committee on Benghazi, and we get to the question even of participation. Do you think the Democrats will participate with the Select Committee, and should they?
I think they should, yes. I don't know if they will. You know, it's fascinating. You mentioned Chairman Issa, who I think is incredibly steamed over the appointment of this special committee. This guy's been doing this for a couple of years now. He certainly hasn't gotten very far. Whether or not there was something to be gotten obviously remains an open question, but this makes him look pretty stupid. It's kind of a no-win in a lot of ways for Republicans. If the Select Committee discloses something or finds something of significance that wasn't found before, well, it kind of makes Congressman Rogers and Congressman Issa look pretty inept, doesn't it? If they don't find something new that the other two committees haven't found before, why are we spending all this taxpayer money?
Well, Rick, I don't think there's actually any money devoted specifically to this. It's coming from some of the other committees. But the last time we had one of these special select committees, it was the liberals leading the charge here, and it was about climate change. And climate change has, again, been made a major issue here by the White House. But, you know, talking about the bang for our buck, that select committee cost the taxpayers about $12 million. But here we are some years later. Again, the White House is raising the red flag on climate change. You know, can we really expect to get anything out of these committees based on the last time one of these happened? When here we are talking about climate change again, and nothing really seems to have happened since then.
Very fair question. I mean, what you're really questioning is the effectiveness of these committees at all, and I think it's reasonable. Look, you're absolutely right in pointing out what you just pointed out about the Climate Change Committee. You know, one distinction I will make is that that was not a situation where there had been hearings going on incessantly and all the hoopla that goes with it for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden they pick a select committee. Kind of weird. We can all be cynical about it, examine the political implications, and you would be right in saying, well, wasn't it all political when they did the same thing on climate change? And yeah, you're right. Here we are, still trying to figure this out, still arguing about it. My personal take is I don't know why we can't stop the politicization of the climate change question. Why can't we simply get our hands on intelligent scientists on both sides of this issue, both sides, and see if we can to a rational conclusion that allows us to plan for what's the best thing to do. You know, I am not a climate change. I don't belong to that religion, okay? And in a lot of respects, it's become a religion, which I'm uncomfortable with. But I obviously have questions about it. I have kids. I have grandkids. You guys, you know, certainly have kids too, if not grandkids. And I do worry about it. I don't want to worry for no reason if it turns out it's not the problem. Some have persuaded me that it is. But we can't seem to get an honest debate on this, and we badly need it.
Well, and certainly, Rick, when you have a situation where former Vice President Gore and others who call those of us who are skeptical about the, quote, science behind climate change, when we're met with the epithet of being deniers, and that whole kind of political rhetoric, it causes some problems. But as we know, politics gives way to public policy. And Rick, a government-funded research organization, published a report last week saying climate change is a severe risk to national security.
Right.
This report says it acts as a catalyst for global political conflict. Meantime, you've got real expenditures at the Pentagon. What is it, like $150 a gallon for green jet fuel? The question becomes, and you aptly talked about this being a, quote, religion. Do you really believe, you say, no, it's not your particular religion, but what about this notion that climate change is this grave threat to our national security?
Well, you know what? If it's real, and I'm saying if because I'm not a scientist, if it's real, and I will tell you there are many scientists who I do trust that do seem to think that it is, you can clearly see the implications of that down the road from a national security point of view, if for no other reason than the battle that will develop for water around the world. If it's not real, as JD, I think you feel that that's the case, or not real in total, then yeah, maybe we shouldn't be spending this money and this effort on it. It takes me back to what I said a bit earlier. We have got to depoliticize it. We've got to take out any suspicion that those who don't agree with climate change are doing it to benefit certain businesses. We got to take that out of the discussion. We've got to take out the supporters who may be getting government grants and it pays them somehow to come up with conclusions that support climate change. We need to depoliticize it. It's way too important. We need an honest appraisal of this by people who want nothing more and nothing less than to protect the planet in a reasonable way for future generations. Look, you and I, we may feel, some bad heat in the summertime, some nasty snow in the wintertime. It's not dramatically changing our lives. What I worry about is what may happen in future generations. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's going to happen because I don't really know. But I sure would love a depoliticized discussion about this by people who have good intent and know what they're talking about. We need to do that. I mean, this is just too important. This is not policy of, well, how do you take care of the poor? Are we doing too much, doing too little? We know what we're talking about there. We can go at that the way we go at that. This is something very different. We all have to take it seriously and have an honest review of what's going on.
And Rick, if you were Senator Ungar or Congressman Ungar, how exactly would you go about doing this? Because you can make the case that both sides here are politicizing this debate, and it seems to be a downward spiral of political discussion here when there are significant and real issues at stake. So what do you think needs to lead this conversation, and how do you get away from the political nature of this debate?
You go find the scientists who clearly don't have an axe to grind. Listen, on our radio show last Saturday, Steele and Ungar on Sirius XM POTUS. You like that little plug I just worked in there?
Very.
That's what it's all about. That's what we have you here.
We had somebody from the Cato Institute on who very much does not believe in global warming. And I have to tell you, gentleman made a very, very compelling argument. We then followed him with Bill Nye, the science guy, who made his points too. So these are people, I don't think either of these people had an axe to grind. There are many scientists around the world who are not trying to score political points. They're not just going after grant money. They are not the stoolies of big business. They're just legitimate scientists. Let's identify them on both sides, get them in a room, get their research together, and let's make this an honest discussion. Again, it's too important to allow it to be politicized the way both sides have. I agree with you on that.
Well, and of course, one of those things that transcends business and climate change, Rick, is the notion of what we were calling at one point cap and trade. And
Right.
It appears John Podesta last week, in kind of a boastful way, said, hey, look, the administration is just going to use executive imprimatur or perhaps executive fiat to basically put in place cap and trade regulations from the EPA. Do you think this is a wise move by the Obama administration? We've got about a minute left.
Well, I read what Podesta said. Frankly, I'm not sure that that's really what he was saying, and I don't think that's going to happen. Look, it's a two-parter. I don't know how you can address the problem until we come up with some kind of a consensus on what the problem is. Once we can get people sensibly approaching it on the same page of what our problems are, how much are we affecting it, how much don't we affect it, there is really no point in crafting these solutions. We've wasted so much time keeping this political that we still don't have answers. How can you come up with a solution when you don't know what you're solving? You have to find out the problem, and then you have to balance the problem with whatever problems you're causing to the economy, if that's going to be the case. How do you deal with the problem that while we may come up with a strategy, it doesn't mean the Chinese and the Indians who create a lot of the pollution in the world are going to do the same? It's complicated, but you start by real data.
It is complicated, and the pursuit of real data and facts in this debate we can both agree on. Rick Ungar, we thank you very much for your time and your input today on America's Forum. So, where do you stand on this? Are you a denier in Al Gore's world about climate change, or is there something to it? Why don't you tweet us your comments at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum.